Uh, at that time, in 1980, I was, first of all, a student. So I completed my studies in June, and I was about to start my very first job on the 1st of September 1980. And I was not then working as a journalist, but um, I was specializing in theater, and I was to start my first job at the Puppet Theater in Gdańsk, a very famous one, actually traveling widely around world, and that's where I've started my very first job, and that's where I have joined Solidarity as a newly established trade union. And although I have just joined the team, they knew that I was part of the strikes, that I was supporting the strikes in 1980. And that's why I was immediately chosen to represent part of the theater employees. So I had a chance to participate in the very first Solidarity meetings on which the unions were established in September 1980, and on which the course for the solidarity of the cultural employees from theaters, from other institutions, were constituting their own unions. So I have become journalist of the first Solidarity newspaper, Solidarity Bulletin, that was published for the first time in the shipyard itself. The editor-in-chief of that magazine was Mariusz Wilk, and that bulletin was known as the Bulletin with Lions. And because it's got lions on the vignette, and the lions are, as you know, the symbol of Gdańsk. So that was the bulletin, that was the main source of news for Solidarity throughout Poland. So people were coming from all over Poland to collect issues of that bulletin. And then they were taking those bulletins to their bigger and smaller towns, and they were always queuing to get a copy in front of the Solidarity headquarters in Gdańsk-Brzeszcz, where I was working, and I was working for that bulletin from, I think, May 1981. I, instead of being a representative of that small theater group of employees, I became Solidarity journalist. So my road to journalism was through the trade union, through Solidarity itself. And I had a unique chance to make interviews for that bulletin with leading figures of Solidarity. So I made interviews with Lech Wales, Jerzy Borowczak, Andrzej Gwiazda, Anna Walentynowicz, back then being, 20-something young person, which, that young people really are very opinionated. So I immediately, I had very defined opinion about them. And what is rather funny is that not all of my interviews with them were published.
You want to talk about censorship, the role of censorship?
It was very funny. It was very funny because I've asked rather, I always believed as a journalist, and I still believe in it, that you have to ask simple questions. And I was asking those simple questions. And in case of both Andrzej Gwiazda or Anna Valentynowicz, it was very revealing how they, like I ask simple question, do you believe that actually Andrzej Gwiazda would make a better leader of Solidarity than Lech Wałęsa? And they were answering, yes, 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 of course, he would be much better. And you know, from my perspective as a young journalist, it was absolutely obvious that for the very reason that Andrzej Gwiazda was an engineer with a degree and also history of belonging to the Communist Party for a short period, he was much less suitable to be the leader of the union. The fact, from the communist perspective, from the authorities, the fact that the leader of the union is a worker with big family, with many children, and that he's not an intellectual related to some, as they used to call them, extremists. It made Wałęsa the most difficult partner for the communists they could imagine. They couldn't attack him on many, many grounds. They couldn't attack him, and they couldn't discredit him as being not representative for the working class. So, from my perspective, if somebody didn't realize that, it means that he or she lacks political intuition. And actually, whenever I've spoken to Lech Wałęsa, I've never heard him saying anything that would be not supportive of our cause, something that would not be helpful in our fight. Although he seemed to speak very freely, he seemed to be very open, but he was very conscious of what he was saying. It wasn't the case with either Andrzej Gwiazda or Anna Valentynowicz. They were saying some things that were really not good for their image and not good for the image of Solidarity. And they were consistent in that. I believe that they were doing it in case of Valentynowicz till the end of her life, and in case of Andrzej Gwiazda, he still can do that. Yes, can say things that actually are harmful from my perspective. Of course, it's my personal perspective, but those 3 interviews were not published at that time in that very paper. So that's really kind of funny. I regret that I don't have the recorded versions anymore, but I used to have the tapes with those interviews. And almost immediately after joining Solidarity office, I was approached by a lady, Maria Komorowska, who was the leader of the Office of Interpreters for the National Committee of Solidarity. And she wanted me to interpret for Lech Wałęsa. She didn't tell me that it was for him. I said, I've never done it before. I have never interpreted. Oh, but I've listened to you when I was actually working for the reception of the first regional Solidarity Congress in Gdynia. It was for the whole region of Gdańsk and Pomerania, a regional meeting of Solidarity, preparing the national meeting of Solidarity in June 1981. And she asked me to interpret an interview of Lech Wałęsa. And it was the very first time I had the chance to interpret anyone, but it was somehow successful, and we worked together ever after for many, many years. Also, after martial law introduced, when Lech Wales returned from the time of his imprisonment for almost a year, when he returned, I kept coming to the St. Brigida Church, where I was interpreting for him, and I was also collaborating with our television group that was making films for the underground Solidarity, that group that originated from the Solidarity press office during the legal period. It was called BIPS, and we have received the first camera from AFL-CIO movement, and then we kept that camera, and Video Studio Gdańsk was established. It was a body that, for the reason of convenience and possibility to work, continue work, they had to work under the church auspices. So only the Catholic Church was allowed to have cameras and film for their own. Officially, it was for religious use, and that's why it was possible for Video Studio to film, for instance, the funeral of priest Popiełuszko. But before that, during the legal period of Solidarity, Video Studio Gdańsk made filming of the building of our monument to the fallen shipyard workers. So we have the whole process on film. And during the martial law, it was also doing filming riots immediately after introduction of the martial law on December 16th, 1981, when the tanks were rolling on the streets of Gdańsk. They were filming fights between ZOMO, militarized militia, and Solidarity activists, but also just young people that were on the streets of Gdańsk. Over 100,000 people were demonstrating then against martial law, so those were huge events. And they kept filming throughout the period of 1980s, and they continued, and they still exist, and they are now located on the premises of the European Solidarity Center. So I was associated with that group for a long time. And then I started working also with foreign crews, television crews that were coming to Gdańsk, and that's how in such a natural way I started filming myself and became documentary film author and director. So I was writing and directing my own films devoted to Solidarity. And later, during the period of Free Poland, I was also making films on art and other subjects. So that was my road to journalism and to the main award you can get. The award that at the time when I was receiving it was called Polish Pulitzer. Now it's called Ground Press. I received that in 1996 for my film on the three generation of Polish political emigration supporting Solidarity from Paris. And it was described by the jury of that award as the best account on transition to democracy in Poland. So I was very honored with that, and so that was my road to journalism. But I moved away from writing to recording on film.
would like to ask about, you already touched on this, about working with Lech Wales. Can you just describe his personality and the style of leadership that you experienced when working with him?
I was impressed from the beginning by Lech Wałęsa's personality, and my very first encounters were, of course, like everybody else. I've seen him as a person during the strikes, but I have seen him before. I have seen him before when we were participating together with my husband, Jacek Mydlarski. We were participating in all the demonstrations that were taking place here in Gdańsk in the 70s. And during those manifestations on the 3rd of May anniversary or 11th of November anniversary, during those patriotic demonstrations, sometimes Lech Wałęsa was speaking. But first of all, in 1979, two people that have spoken near the monument of our King Sobieski, such a monument on horse in the middle of Gdańsk. So those people were arrested, and for 3 months, the two of my friends, two girls, and Lech Wałęsa were leading prayers in the Basilica of Holy Virgin in Gdańsk, this huge basilica in the center of Gdańsk. And in a small chapel, they were holding prayers for 3 months for the release of the imprisoned activists of Young Poland movement. And Lech Wałęsa was speaking during those prayers, so I've heard him. But when I really saw him on the gates of the shipyard, speaking to the crowd, I think that it was a common experience, that he is speaking for us, that he really represents us, that he is speaking, and it was something like a revelation, that he is speaking officially from the gates of the shipyard without a trace of that communist language, the language of bureaucracy, the language that really resembled Orwellian newspeak. It was terrible, that way we were addressed by the authorities, and somehow people were learning this new language, and they were all more or less using it. Even quite a portion of intellectuals, definitely party intellectuals, were using that language. You know, everything had to be described in terms of socialist justice, socialist democracy. Well, Wałęsa was not using that sort of meaningless and quite often falsified phrases. He was speaking very directly, using the language that was a very interesting mixture of the everyday language and something very, very different, something coming straight from the Bible. So he was using lots of metaphors. He was also using lots of jokes, and he was presenting a very refined and authentic and his own sense of humor in that. And as I said, he was very conscious what he's saying. He was fully aware that he can't say everything. You know, he couldn't describe his aims openly, including, like, you know, he couldn't say something like, I'm fighting for the independence and for getting rid of Soviet troops at that time. You know, it was not possible. We were in a different situation. Yet his metaphors, his way of speaking has presented to the nation a clear sense that he knows what he's doing, and that he really means something important, and that the change he's trying to introduce is deep. And that also, what was very important, he was not trying to eliminate some people from the participation in it. He was very open, suggesting that anyone can join, that anyone can be part of that movement. And it was so effective. It was so effective on so many people. And then I had a personal encounter with Lech Wałęsa immediately after the strikes. I approached him just to look closer, and he was signing photographs, and he had like hundreds of those photographs. People were giving him photographs, and he was signing them, and I was just standing nearby, and at a certain point he gave me one of those photographs with his signature. And I told him, I haven't given you any photos to sign for me. And he said, no problem, I'm like a Robin Hood, I'm taking from those who have a lot of photographs, I'm giving to those that don't have any. And it was so fast and quick answer, showing really his ability to react in a split second, which was his very, very characteristic feature. And when I started working for the Solidarity, before that I've participated in those organizing meetings. So I also saw the way he was interacting with the others, his way of introducing some calm into the heating discussion, his idea of natural leadership. And I was really impressed by him. And the moment I started interpreting for him, I became even more impressed. But I was also impressed by the way he managed to work together with me. So during that very first interview, at a certain point, I realized I will not memorize as much as he said. I said, just a moment, please. And he stopped. And from that moment on, he always stopped at the right moment. So I could perfectly, easily interpret. And it was really nice. And also I remember that when once Japanese journalists during the National Congress, they started asking questions related to Brezhnev doctrine, that whatever he would have answered to that question would be detrimental to Solidarity. He just dismissed that journalist telling him, and I knew that it was a journalist from the leading Japanese newspaper. He said, you are not prepared, I'm not going to discuss it. And I went pale, and Wałęsa looked at me and said, no worry, he has to have this interview, he will return, don't you be afraid, it all would be fine in the end. And of course he was right. The journalist came after dinner, and he didn't repeat the sensitive question, and the interview went very well, was great success, both for the journalist and for Wałęsa, and for Polish-Japanese relationship.
Be considered or could lead this movement in the...
We have to realize that back in 1980, there was no movement to be led. There were small groups of the opposition. Some of those people already knew each other, but those were relatively tiny circles. And in Gdańsk here, we had Young Poland movement, which was, run by people in their 20s, and they were pretty young. You had a group that was loosely associated with the Workers' Defense Committee, and that included Bogdan Borusewicz, who was also part of the free trade unions of the coastal region, yes? Wolne Związki Zawodowe Wybrzeża. And Wałęsa was also part of that organization. So many of those that became leaders of Solidarity were part of that tiny group called Free Trade Unions of the coastal region. So it included Wałęsa, Walentynowicz, Gwiazda, his wife Joanna Gwiazda, and Anna Walentynowicz. They were all part of that movement, which was not really a movement, but a very tiny group of dissidents. And also Jerzy Borowczak was involved in that, so a very young worker that started the strike in that small group. And they knew people from Warsaw like Jacek Kuroń. They knew people from Workers' Defense Committee, but people generally, including myself, did not know at the time those names. We knew names of Kuroń and Michnik because they were imprisoned for a long time and they were highly publicized by the official press as being enemies of the communism, yes, or dissidents, in fact, that separated from the previous communist movement of the 1950s. So, from the perspective of younger generation, and you have to remember that half of the population of Poland at the time was below 25. So I was a part of that majority of the nation for whom Stalinist period were, ancient history, yes, ancient history. And in that ancient history, there were some people that might have been seduced by the communism. From our perspective, there was nothing to be seduced about. We were totally cured by the years of the official communism from whatever allure the communism might have for other people in the West that didn't experience how it tastes when it's implemented by force, especially in the Soviet version. Yes, so from our perspective, people who made that road from communism to the opposition were people who made a mistake in the beginning of the road, yes? That of course were very brave and did a lot of important things afterwards, but for many people, the idea that they've joined that party at all was a big mistake. And the only thing that mitigating circumstances were that they were young at that time, yes? But that was about it. We didn't know names of the people that started being active in the 70s. I personally knew some of the people of Young Poland movement because they were my friends from my studies. But it wasn't so widespread in the society. For many people, the beginning of the strike was just a revelation. Out of the blue, we have people who are openly speaking out what others were just speaking in a very quiet voices inside their own apartments. So there is a big difference. And for 99% of the society, it's the voice of the Wałęsa that speaks like that for the first time. And you have to understand that in the official media, they can't see it. They can't listen to it. And even when the negotiations were going on here in Gdańsk, there was still a blockade on the information in other cities. So in the official media, there was no information. That's one of the demands of the 21 demands, is to let people in Poland know that the Inter-Factory Striking Committee was established. So they don't know, officially they didn't know even that. Of course, unofficially, they know. Once from gossips, people coming back from the coastal region and telling them, even people, ordinary people who were on holidays, coming back and telling what's going on in here. And the other source is, of course, Radio Free Europe or Voice of America. So the estimation says that up to 70% of people had access to that. So people knew. And what they have listened there? Speeches of Lech Wałęsa, yes? And the decision that he's going to lead the strike in August 1980 was far more important than anyone might have expected. And why he was chosen? He was chosen because it was shown that during the previous patriotic demonstrations and meetings, he was the best speaker, the most applauded speaker. And Bogdan Borusewicz, who himself was not such a public speaker, and he knew that the young workers he had chosen as that group that would start the strike were also not that kind of speakers. He knew that only Wałęsa can start that strike and lead that strike. But it has turned out that he not only has started the strike, but that he had grasped the spirit of the nation. And when the strikes and the negotiations with the government, in which he was brilliant, when they have finished with victory, it was obvious that he would be leading solidarity here in Gdańsk region, but delegates that came from all over Poland said they don't want the union to be organized in a way that was planned here in Gdańsk. They have planned that the union, the national union, would be divided into regional branches and they would be separate. It wouldn't be one union, but many unions in many places. And all the delegates that came from all over Poland said, no, we don't want it. We want one union with Wałęsa on top. So that was a public decision. You might even say it was a national decision. And also Wałęsa understood it after several minutes of discussion. But for the rest of the group of the free trade unions, like Gwiazda, Walentynowicz, Joanna Duda-Gwiazda, it was not so easy to grasp. And in that interviews I had with them, they couldn't grasp it. They couldn't understand what happened. And that Lech Wałęsa, after strikes in 1980, was not the same person as before. He wasn't one of their group. He was the leader of the 10 million people strong movement. And his greatness lied in the fact that he quickly understood it. And he understood it very deeply and very personally. And he realized what he has become and what are his obligations, what is his burden. he realized that he had to be available all the time, that he has in a way to abandon his private life, that he's going to be controlled by the government in a very day-to-day and very unpleasant way, so he can do not, he cannot afford a single false step. He has to be beyond any doubts, any questions in every sphere of his life. And yeah, he took it all fully consciously, and he organized his life accordingly. So he would go to the early Holy Mass at 7 o'clock, and then he would arrive to the Solidarity office, and there he would stay for as long as it was possible, travel as far as it was necessary, and organize everything, and took all the decisions. He also found out that he had to be responsible for any decision taken by the union. So he was available for the decision-making process all the time, always. And he also realized that he has to delegate. And that was his great quality as the leader. He was very quick to delegate. And he quite often had a good idea who to charge with what. Even people whom he has not worked with before. He was very fast to decide, you are going to do this, you are going to do that. And he was also very good in accepting other people's ideas. So you have come with a bright idea, and Lech Wałęsa typically would say, yes, it's a bright idea, do it, do it. Yes, so he would charge the person who invented it with fulfilling his bright idea. And it was really, if you can imagine that mess, 10 million people starting organizing something, yes, if you just can imagine that, it was such an array of decisions to make. And he was really brilliant in doing that, also coping with it with a smile. Not with frustration, not with resentment, generally giving everyone credit to start with. And if somebody was very disappointing in putting some of those brilliant ideas into practice, he would just give that person something else to do, because clearly that person was not suitable for that kind of job. And after 2 or 3 times, he would just not delegate to that person anything. So he would concentrate on those that would deliver. Yes, he had a metaphor for that, saying that he's riding those horses that are capable of running. And, and he also realized that he has to change sometimes people who are doing certain things, because some people get tired. Well, now that I'm thinking about it, we were very devoted. We have done a lot of things, but every one of us sometimes was retreating, going back to his or her personal affairs for a couple of days, couple of weeks, couple of months. Although we have to say that people were incredibly involved in creating Solidarity movement. People were giving so much time and effort to create something new, something positive, and generally Solidarity was bringing out from people what was best in them. That was really happening. People were happy. They felt they are on the right track. They felt they can contribute to the common good, and it was really a very bright period to start with. But then many people had, problems. Some people were ill, somebody in the family felt ill. The difference was Wałęsa never withdrawn. If he was sick, he was pretending he's healthy. If there was a crisis in his family, he was quite effectively looking for help from other sources, asking people to help, organizing that help, but then concentrating on the solidarity issues all the time. Yes, so that was very, very different, and that's why also Wałęsa claimed that when he was finally imprisoned, first of all he went to sleep. Yes, because he had finally time to he didn't have to do anything at that moment, although he had enormous task of refusing all the seductive proposals that the government had for him, to limit solidarity, to eliminate some of the extremists on right and left, to create new solidarity based on Christian values. Wałęsa just flatly refused all that, including the offer to become prime minister or deputy prime minister, or getting some very valuable things, material and immaterial. He just flatly refused everything for almost a year, being alone with no advisors whatsoever, because he was cut away from that. And when finally some church representatives were coming to visit him, some priests, they were actually also part of that seduction campaign. They also were suggesting that it's possible to get rid of those workers' defense committee, solidarity advisors, and just to concentrate on that Christian core of solidarity movement. But it's important to stress that such a suggestion has never come from Pope John Paul II himself. He just trusted in Wałęsa, and he never ever suggested that he had to do something in a different manner. So all the support that Solidarity was getting from Vatican, which was very important, and all the support of the church, material support, and the support of space, so that was the only space within Polish People's Republic that was not state control space. So that's where independent culture has moved. That's where, in fact, life of Lech Wałęsa was moved to the large extent after he was released from his imprisonment. It's very telling that even it was on the premises of the St. Brigida Church that he was listening to the ceremony of the Nobel Peace Prize Award. His wife went to Oslo to accept it, and he was listening to the radio transmission through the foreign radio, yes? Because Polish radio, Polish television was not covering it. Can you just imagine it? It's unbelievable, yes? So he was listening to that on the church premises, and the life has moved very much to the churches, including art exhibitions, including theater performances, poetry readings by leading Polish actors, boycotting official media and boycotting official theaters, and especially very symbolic for Poland, TV theater. So those leading actors became available to the public only on the church premises. And the concerts were also going on in the churches. So the whole underground clandestine culture, solidarity-sponsored culture, it all has moved to the underground, to the churches, but also to private flats. So people in the 80s became very much involved in that church-going aspect. And it's worth reminding that there were at least three categories. There were people who were always churchgoers, that were Catholics, and they were practicing, they were going to the Holy Mass, as a Holy Mass. But there were at least two other categories. There were people who were believers, but never used to go to the church too often. And they started going, as part of patriotic duty during the martial law. But there is a third very interesting category, probably unique to Poland, and those were people who were atheists. And they were going to every Holy Mass that was Mass for the country, and to every event organizing on church premises. Also believe that they are so there were believers, practicing believers, there were non-practicing believers, and then you have the third category, non-believers but practicing. So that was, something that people were themselves laughing at, but it was the case. And as usually in such circumstances, some of those people remained within church afterwards. Some of them stayed, and some of them became believers, but definitely not everyone.
One more question about the perception of solidarity movement in the West. If you wanted to speak to any misconceptions that you may have come across or seen that the West gets wrong about the movement.
Well, already back then, during the legal period of solidarity, many scientists, students, and also journalists were coming from the West, and naturally being part of the interpreters and translators office of the National Committee of Solidarity, I've met a lot of them. And quite often they had such a misconception that that the whole movement was based on Polish socialist and communist traditions of the past, and on the traditions of Polish trade movements from before World War II, or even on the tradition of people like Róża Luxemburg, famous communist figure, and they couldn't grasp how far away young people in Poland were from that sort of concept. Even those that had some affiliation like that in their families, and it was the case of some of the members of the Workers' Defense Committee from Warsaw. They were children. Some of them were children of communists, and some of them had that tradition. But their engagement stemmed from the opposition to communism. And a very prominent figure for those that were intellectuals, that were studying it generally, the important figure was Leszek Kołakowski, a philosopher that actually went from being a Marxist to the most radical critic of Marxism, who after 1968 emigrated to Oxford, became a professor in Oxford, and he lectured there, telling how that Marxist philosophy became responsible for organizing totalitarian state. And it's a very interesting piece of thought. It's important that he became a spokesman of the Workers' Defense Committee in the West, and it's interesting how he later has become member of that committee of solidarity organizing the election of June 1989. So he was part of Komitet Obywatelski przy Lechu Wałęsie. It wasn't called officially Solidarity because Solidarity was not yet re-legalized. So it was called Committee affiliated to Lech Wałęsa. A chairman. It didn't say a chairman of what, yes? So it was such a way of, without using the name Solidarity, but you have a chairman, Lech Wałęsa, whose committee it was. And it was almost 100 men, including Leszek Kołakowski. So the important feature of Solidarity was that although the strikes were started in big industrial units like shipyards, mines, steelworks, from the beginning it involved people employed in places like theaters, Polish Academy of Science, universities. And those people that formed Solidarity at those units were very much members of Solidarity trade unions. They were also employees, and they felt part of the movement, and very much so. And you have also to realize that when martial law was introduced, among the strikes very brutally stopped by the communist militia were strikes at the universities and also at the Polish Academy of Science. And those elderly professors were brutally taken out by force because, they organized a sit-in in their Polish Academy of Science, and they were taken out to the streets. People sometimes in their 70s were taken brutally out, just like workers in some of the industrial institutions like mines or shipyards. And also those people, those intellectuals, were imprisoned together with workers in many similar camps like Strzebielinek here near Gdańsk or Białołęka near Warsaw. There were 60 like that, and only afterwards, only after several months, communist authorities decided to separate some of the intellectuals, put them in another place. But even then, they were accompanied by leaders of the largest regions. Yes, but during those months of, they call it internment, because as if it was a war. Yes, it was martial law. So they were not in prisons, but they were in such camps, which were of various degree of prison routine. It varied very much from place to place, but generally in the beginning it was quite harsh. It was winter, so in many places it was cold, it was wet, and some of those people were, there were people who were 20, and there were people who were 60-something, 70-something, yes? One of the oldest prisoners was Władysław Bartoszewski, a professor and an intellectual leader of Polish-German friendship after terrible experience of the World War II. He was himself the prisoner of Auschwitz as a very young man. Then he was in Żegota, Polish Home Army organization devoted to the support for Jewish population, to help Jews. And after so he was imprisoned in Auschwitz. During Stalinist period, he was Stalinist prisoner, and in the 1981 he was imprisoned again, for solidarity, and he was also imprisoned in the 60s. So he spent really many years imprisoned, and of course he was elected by the other prisoners of solidarity, their representative and their authority, and he was able to teach them also how to relate to that prison system and so on and so forth. So from the beginning, I think that in the West it was not fully understood that it's not a movement of just one group, that it's a very wider movement, that is a movement of the whole nation, whole society, and it's at the same time a revolution, which was widely accepted in the West that it's a revolution, but that it's a protest against the totalitarian rule, but it was also a national uprising, trying to negotiate a new way of national existence and also new forms of existence in Europe, new form of presenting our culture and our history, and it was a huge protest also against lies in public life. And it's also a part of the totalitarian system, probably any totalitarian system, left or right, but lies within communist system are particularly severe. It's based on a whole array of lies. And one of the successes of Wałęsa's leadership was that he was able to show those lies in a very precise yet not confrontational style. So he was also laugh at some of the lies of the system, just showing life as it is, existence as it is, and without particular bitterness and without pointing finger who is responsible for it, but it was very visible who is responsible for it, yes? And he would show, and just by naming things, not in a particularly cruel way. He would just name it as it is, without being cruel to those that are responsible for the creation of the system in the first place, but then responsible for maintaining it. He would somehow offer a chance to change right now and join the rest, join the majority in building something new, in also recreating the language. And in fact, it was very difficult when he was speaking like that for the other side not to change the way they speak. It was really like magic effect of saying that the king is naked, and he was doing it without excessive bitterness, and that was also. But Solidarity was not bitter as a movement. Solidarity was constructive and was optimistic, and was full of hope for the future. The future was supposed to be better, and somehow anyone could be part of that future. At the time, I thought that maybe Kania, as the first secretary of the party, that he's kind of pretending that he wants to work together with Solidarity, that maybe it's not
honest. Maybe he doesn't really want to find some new ways of dealing with the movement. But probably we were wrong. Probably he really wanted to work together with Solidarity, whereas there were other forces within the party of which we were aware. So we could name it like Olszewski. There were hardliners that were really going very far in their ideas. It's now well known that on 26th of August 1980, just 4 days before signing of the agreement, there was an idea of bombing the shipyard. So attacking it and destroying it together with those people. So Kania was strongly opposed to that sort of solutions, and he generally was thinking about non-violent solution of discussing with Solidarity new ways. And the moment Jaruzelski came to power, it's a moment when they have decided already on the martial law, I believe.
It was decided long
Yes, yes, it was premeditated during the strike already, yes, in 1980. But Jaruzelski, on one hand, was holding at bay the real hardliners that would like to destroy those people, and Jaruzelski was actually that middle road, martial law with as little victims as possible, and then waiting for the movement to die out, yes? And that's what they were hoping for, that after 1, 2, 3, 4 years, people would have enough of everything, yes? And it almost worked, because not everybody was capable of storing the energy and being active and, for instance, hiding for 3, 4 years, or printing underground, or being unemployed for so long, yes? Those were very high prices that people were paying personally for their personal choices. People were persecuted, they were deprived of their jobs, they couldn't work as journalists, for example. There was a huge purge in the official press, in the official media. There were purges among teachers, among professors at the universities. So there was very difficult time personally for many people. And Jaruzelski was hoping that it would die out, and eventually they would not need something like Solidarity anymore. They have created their own new unions. In fact, as late as in the middle of the 1980s, they managed to have some people forced into joining those new trade unions that were called Crow trade unions, because this military council was the first letters formed the word wrona, which is a crow in Polish. So those Crow trade unions finally got some attendance, but they have broken so many people into acceptance of that dictatorship from the authorities, and once again joining the union not of their choice but a different one. And it seems now that Kania was actually a person that wanted to do it in a different way.
Jaruzelski, he had stated that he imposed martial law as doing the Polish people a favor from being invaded by the Soviet Union. Do you believe that to be true, or what are your thoughts on that?
It's very difficult to answer the question. But in my personal view, on one hand you have Lech Wałęsa, whose father was crushed by Germans during World War II, and whose personal childhood was therefore very difficult. He was raised by his father's brother, who became his stepfather, and his personal loss caused by history, by German invasion, was huge. And it included the fact that although his mother desperately wanted him to study, and she went as far as to emigrate to US to earn money together with her husband, stepfather. You know, they had large family, and they failed to make great career in US and great money. And they also died. She died in a car crash, and you know, it's a story that for many people would be a beginning of the end. Wałęsa, it was the beginning of a huge personal success, and he believed in the power of change, of changing life and world for the better. The case of Jaruzelski, he was exiled with his parents during the World War II. He was older than Wałęsa. So during the war, he was bigger boy, but still a boy. And he saw both his parents died, destroyed by the Soviet system in a terrible circumstances of Siberia. His own eyesight was permanently damaged by being there in Siberia. That's why he was wearing those black glasses all the life. It's very telling and somehow metaphorical, those dark glasses, yes? He had no hope of freeing Poland from Soviet Union. He felt that we are doomed, that we would always be under Soviet control, and he became, in a way, part of it, yes? Being first a political officer in the Polish army under Soviet supervision during World War II, and ever after. You have to remember that he was also part of Polish forces invading Czechoslovakia during Prague Spring. It's horrible if you think about it. And he was also part of that attack on Polish workers in 1970. So his conscience is heavy with those actions that, from the perspective of the majority of Polish society, they are unforgivable. Yet at the same time, probably personally, coming from what is called a good Polish noble family, yes, he probably had retained some feeling and sentiment for Poland, for independent Poland. He probably, like many others, believed that there was no other way to maintain at least formal Polish independence than by having communist government under Soviet control for many years after World War II. And clearly he wanted to spare as many lives as possible during the martial law, and he succeeded in that in a way. It was probably one of the least bloodshed during a martial law than you can imagine. But still, for many people, that martial law was a terrible time, and many losses, also losses of lives, if not of physical, that's sometimes of spiritual life, of family life. So the cost was immense, and I'm not so sure that we would ever be able to tell whether Soviet invasion at that time was possible. Maybe yes, maybe not. Definitely, the Soviets might have threatened even if we wouldn't find it on paper, maybe he was told that in open text that they are going to invade if he wouldn't do what he has done in reality. It's very difficult to pass judgment on such a figure, but many people do not feel sentimental about him. And then it was American pressure that put him in a position of Polish president for an interim period. It was painful. From our perspective, it was simply painful. No one wanted him in that position, including, I believe, people from his own side. He then wanted, and it shows that he didn't really fully follow the spirit of times. He wanted to, and he gave the power to organize government to the Minister of Interior Affairs, to Kiszczak. And that was, of course, one step too far. No one was going to accept that, yes? It would have been unbelievable to have President Jaruzelski and the Prime Minister Kiszczak in free Poland. It wouldn't be free Poland. It would have been some kind of imitation, yes? So his role as the president for that interim period was in a way positive, but you can't, it was not necessary. It was foreign pressure that put him in there, this time from the West, not from the East, but in both cases he wasn't a person of the popular choice.